a copy of the PowerPoint, which I'm about to start on. You can unmute yourself if you have anything desperately important to say. But in the meantime, I'm going to share my screen and start immediately on growth or degrowth. Somebody asked me, is that really a word, degrowth? And yes, it is indeed a word. In fact, it's more than a word. You can see that it is actually a website, and if it's a website, it means it's proper. You can see for yourself what it means. I don't think I will read all of that out for you. You should be able to read it, and that will be in the recording anyway. Let's move on. 50 years ago, somebody wrote, what was it called? Limits to Growth. And it was attacked actually at the time. It was either attacked or ignored, but it said we cannot continue to grow in the way that we have. Sooner or later in the 21st century, there will be problems. And in fact, that was quite prescient. That has been the case. What it led to is a current worry that we are distorting what we are living through, and that is distorting our perception of not just goods, but happiness as well. However, let's be as concrete as we can. And that leads inevitably more manufacturing, more growth to heating up the planet. And you can see from that graph that we are already at 1 degree centigrade and will almost certainly reach 2 degrees centigrade by 2050. And that leads to further problems. Growth means not just more warmth, but more people wanting to get away from it. This is the number of people who are now attempting to cross the channel in boats. You can see it continues to rise, and no doubt 2023 will be worse. We have seen this before, actually. I'm old enough to remember when there were people on the other side of the English Channel that wanted to get across in boats. We could see them if we had a decent pair of binoculars, but the climate emigrants, the climate refugees, who are so numerous that we cannot see them. They are very large in number. At the moment, we are coping, but not very well. In those far off days, we abandoned elections and we said we have a war cabinet. And you can see Churchill and Attlee sitting side by side. And that lasted for 6 years. No elections for 6 years. And the war cabinet said what we would do, and we did it. I was on the receiving end of that. There's my ration book in the top left-hand corner. And there's what was inside my ration book. And my question on the left-hand side, how many Brits would be prepared to live on that? I can tell you that the margarine tasted like axle grease, and you could put the whole of your week's jam ration on one slice of bread. I know because I did it. Moving on, let's have a look at the 3 functions that define us. First of all, civil society, which ought to be more powerful than it actually is, but it is largely powerless, and therefore that will not change the world, because to change the world we need 2 other functions. One is called business and the corporations, but they are locked into a system that promotes profit through growth. They have to worry about their shareholders. And it's an extraordinary fact that Bill Gates gives away money as fast as he can, but he actually makes it faster than he can give it away. And that's because he's a major shareholder in Microsoft. There's something wrong there somewhere. The third function is the politicians. And they also are locked into a short-term system, which means first past the post and worrying about re-election at the end of 5 years. That chap on the right there leads me to mention that we now have a monarch who has pronounced climate crisis concerns, and he has expressed them quite freely up to now. Unfortunately, from now on, he will only be permitted to raise an eyebrow, or perhaps he will change the nature of the job. I hope he does, because he and I agree with each other on the question of growth. Will technology perhaps suddenly jump up and save us? I doubt it personally. I'm very doubtful about, for example, electric motor cars. They seem to me to be made of the same steel, plastic, etc. And I'm no doubt that the motor manufacturers are salivating at the thought of all those nice cars that they can sell. Floating cities, well, why not? The South Koreans are planning this particular job that you see here. And of course, the lovely Dutch are already doing it in Amsterdam. But those last two were still actually growth solutions. And what I hope to do is to promote a discussion about the dilemma that follows from worrying about the alternatives to growth. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and invite you to raise a hand if you wish to speak, either a flesh hand or a yellow manufactured hand, which you will find under reactions at the bottom of your screen. So, open. Yes, Harry.
Thank you, Tom. There's one thing that you didn't mention, which I think is the crux of the matter, actually, in the dilemma that we're facing, and that is you showed the War Cabinet of 1941 there. I guess the population of the world was about 3 billion then. It's about 9 billion now, and the population is growing. So we have to have goods and services to grow to meet the growth of the population. I would also sort of point out that some of the greatest despoilations of the world have come from countries that considered themselves socialist at the time. China and Russia have both been great destroyers of the environment. I mean, give it to the Soviets. They're the only country in the world, I think, that's destroyed a whole sea, the Aral Sea, which was taken up with cotton growing, taking absolutely no notice of the environment whatsoever. And now it's just a dust bowl. But we have to do something about population growth, because I believe that it's the population growth which is driving the requirement for goods and services, which is then in turn driving the problems in climate change.
Good. Thank you, Harry. Donald.
Thanks, Tom, and thanks for an interesting, as usual, an unusual perspective. But you're coming at it from, if I may say so, just to disagree slightly, from a first world perspective. And what we're seeing here, and I also both agree and disagree with what Harry just said, we need to be paying much more attention to India, China, Brazil, Africa in general, and their concerns and their perspectives on the world and the future, because the future is theirs. It's not ours in Europe. It's not even, I dare say, in most of South America, and certainly not in North America. I remember a discussion on this topic about 5 years ago in our U3A, and I wish I still had the slide. I'm sure I can discover it. But there was one dramatic slide in the presentation which showed us that we are already consuming a world and a half of resources every year. So what we're doing is totally unsustainable, and
Right.
what we need is sustainability, whether that is growth or degrowth or slower growth or faster growth, whatever. We need resources, and we need more resources. We need, yes, a smaller population growth, but we need sustainability more than anything else.
Thank you, Donald. You mentioned North America. I'll ask Tom Mottle from Boston to comment.
Thank you, Tom. Harry's point and Doran's point fold into, or my comment folds into theirs.
We're having audio trouble.
And I reflect, or it brings to mind, you're raising it. Is it better now?
Yes, better now.
Okay, I'll
I'm afraid he's got
speak louder and I'll speak closer to my microphone. Harry, breaking up again?
Try again, Tom.
Okay, I'll just try to be very brief if I'm breaking up. But my comment really relates to the issue of sustainability as fundamental to considering the various options. And what comes to my mind, and my friend and colleague Ed Schoen is here as well, is the company we worked for grew very rapidly, and there was a feeling that you either grow or you die, and that's a simplistic statement, obviously. But sustainability is the key issue, because you need growth per Harry's comments, but sustainability and how to go about the growth is the key issue, not to just degrow.
Right, thank you. More comments, please. We seem to be plumping down on the side of growth, and to hell with degrowth. Can I have a champion for degrowth? Am I the only one? I mean, even King Charles III agrees with me. Barry Zussman, would you? I'm terribly sorry. Reen, I think, was first. Reen van den Handel. You're muted.
I agree that we need some degrowth, really, and I think the UK is doing its best by starting Brexit, which will automatically lead to degrowth in this country, at least. But another point is, I also agree that population growth is an issue that needs to be dealt with. But there is another elephant in the room, and that is the money system that we have, whereby we allow commercial banks to create money. In this country, in the UK, about 97% of the money that is in circulation is actually money that's created by the banks. So if you go to the bank and you borrow money, that is not money that comes from the state, that is money that the bank creates at that moment. And when you pay your loan back, then that money disappears again out of circulation. And this is one of the reasons why we have these bust and boom systems. But if you think about it, the bank lends you the money that they create. They then want interest on that money. Well, if all the money is created by banks, you can only pay the interest if somebody else takes out a loan that creates more money. So in effect, we've got a system whereby debt grows and grows till the system busts. And yes, it is one of the stimulus for this crazy consumer system that we have.
Right, thank you. I did see Barry, you were next. I think.
Yeah, I did. I think I had a glitch and I couldn't actually get in. I mean, I've heard Tom on this subject before, and I think I certainly can see that there are an awful lot of things wrong with the current system, but getting from where we are now right back to basics and starting again seems a bit like trying to reverse evolution. You know, it's already happened, and to get from where we are now backwards and start again seems inconceivable. It may be the only way that we can construct a better system is if there's some sort of global cataclysm and we all have to start again globally, and that may force us to think differently. But getting from where we are now to Tom's idea.
Okay, before I call on Grace, I might suggest that we might have a catastrophe, and might be better to have a catastrophe now than a double catastrophe 50 years from now. Grace from Cape Town, please. Unmute. Unmute, please. Yours. Okay.
Thank you, Tom, for bringing this provocative topic to the attention of U3A internationally. I want to quote Kate Raworth and Donut Economics. Do just indicate to me with a show of hands if you've heard of Donut Economics. Okay, a couple of you have. So I was actually watching something she did this morning. Actually, I see, I've actually got a piece of string in my hand because I couldn't find, and she talks about how the economy grows and grows and grows. But to put it very crudely, what the economy has to do is to become circular, which doesn't show up terribly well here. And she has presented a very interesting theory, written the book 4 or 5 years ago, and has got now various organizations following up on her donut economics. And what struck me particularly as I read the introduction to her theory is that present capitalism and our present basic systems of economics were actually thought of 200 or 100 years ago. And as the topic has already come up in this discussion, the population of the world was very different in those days. And the thought of using the total Earth's resources wasn't even on people's minds. But we know now that the Earth has limited resources, and was already mentioned that if we are to live the way Americans live, we need 4.5 Earths, which we're not going to get. So we have to educate ourselves and educate the public that we have got to work out another system with different values and a different lifestyle.
Grace, would you put the name of the book and the author in the chat panel so that people can perhaps
With pleasure.
buy it? Donald Denner.
Thanks, Tom. Just if I might come back in. No, I wasn't saying that I'm against degrowth. I'm just saying the plain fact of the matter is that we have to sustain our world as long as possible. It had a beginning and it will inevitably, therefore, have an end. I think that's entirely logical. It's just when it will end. And hopefully it won't end in our lifetime or in our grandchildren's lifetime. I agree with Barry. I mean, if you start imposing first world economic policies to limit growth, you're going to hurt the populations of India and China and Africa. And it's disrespectful to them really to be talking about, I think, active degrowth policies. It's much too autocratic. Just to remind everybody, I thought there was an interesting historical fact that in the 1860s, there were 400 million Chinese living in the world, 400 million back in 1860, well before the development of China. And the second thing about your car analogy, Tom, yes, I agree with you. We were all encouraged to run petrol engines. Then we were all encouraged to run diesel because it was cheaper. And now we're being encouraged to run electric, and electricity is going through the roof in terms of price. So we're always going to have to go for the most expensive option, which I think is fascinating, but stupid as well. Thank you.
Harry Belty.
I would like to come back on this car thing, because human endeavour is all about continual scientific and technical improvement. We are now going into electric cars, and with electric cars, you can have self-driving cars. I don't think the usage of the car in the future is going to be anything like the usage of the car in the past. I have a car. It's parked outside my house for about 90% of the time, which is insane. And I think that almost everybody else is something like me, that the cars are parked for most of the time doing no good. If you had self-driving cars which you could share, and you could call up for a ride when you wanted one, and that's it, you only used it when you want it, the number of cars on the road would plummet. You would have degrowth, but you'd only get that by scientific endeavour and advancement. So I think these things happen, but they don't happen by government fiat, but they happen by most of human endeavour has happened by bottom-up entrepreneurs who have brought out a good idea and reinterpreted the world that they live in. Thank you.
Right, pass to Tom Mottle in Boston.
Just briefly, Harry, what you're saying is what I mean by sustainability, an intelligent, knowledgeable attack on the problem scientifically. Thank you.
Reen?
Yeah, I want to make a case for your war cabinet, because I think part of the problem at the moment is the short-term political solutions that we see, because politicians are only interested in the term of their election, of the 4 or 5 years that they're elected for, at least with a war cabinet. And we got a climate crisis here in this country. It's forgotten at the moment, but this crisis is around the corner and coming at us at top speed. And we need to deal with that. And I think a war cabinet might be the solution for that.
Fine, thank you. Ed in Boston.
Yeah, followed by Harry's comment about moving to the different approach for cars. I'm not sure the question is growth versus degrowth, but really some form of transformation from how we live today to moving into a different paradigm. And you don't have to degrow. I think you continue to grow, but it's focused on different areas doing different things. So,
thank you. John Bigar from Dunleary.
Thank you very much. A very interesting discussion. I spent a lot of my professional time working in the United Nations system, and often there, what we heard was a lot of good ideas that at least we thought they were good ideas, coming from those within the EU, within the Western European group, within basically the Northern Hemisphere. We found that when we put them to the UN, within the UN context, very many countries from outside those groups had real problems with the fundamentals of the idea. And I feel today that one of the issues we have is that, frankly, the discussion has been largely between actually rather elderly men from the Northern Hemisphere. I'd really like to hear the views of the younger people, and particularly those who are not from within Europe and North America. I think their perspective might be rather different.
Yes, well, I'll call on Prasanna and Arti later on. Michael Cockerell is next.
Yes, I think the perspective that I have on this is that we may actually have a fairly limited future anyway. If we're going to get to grips with climate change, it's going to take massive investments in all sorts of things, coupled with populations being largely wiped out through drought and so on. The scale of the problem is massive. So I think the question that you're posing, growth or degrowth, in a normal situation of steady growth is quite different to the one that we have at the moment. I'm not sure how you solve that. I'm not
Right.
sure how anyone is going to solve the climate change issue, but
I'm not
it's
sure
relevant.
either. Ken Carley from Salisbury. No, you're muted still, Ken. Hold your space bar down.
Yeah, I've got it. We've just lost James Lovelock at the age of 103, unfortunately, and he invented the concept of Gaia, which was a world which was self-sustaining, and that was 40 odd years ago, and many of the concepts that he introduced there were totally ignored. And now we've gone deeper into the Maya, and his point was that the earth will balance. It'll carry on regardless, and it will self-sustain, but it won't include necessarily human beings.
Right. I'm not sure if that isn't magical thinking. Harry Belsey, and then I'm going to suggest that one of the two youngsters that have joined us might like to have a word. We'd like to hear from you. Harry.
Thanks, Tom. I hope I'm going to be coherent here, because this idea has sort of been growing in my mind since this discussion started. But it strikes me that I know you all think that we're not taking global warming seriously enough, but let me put it to you that the government, the UK government and several other governments have voted to go carbon neutral by 2050. Now, I don't understand that they've done anything much more than that. So, excuse me, but when we get to 2035, should we be halfway through? No one's got a plan of how we're going to get there. And if you haven't got a plan, you're not going to get there. And it strikes me that to say we want to be carbon neutral by 2050, it puts a layer of an overarching layer of legal requirement on our economics.
Yes.
Up to now, companies have supposed to be working for the benefit of their shareholders. That's what they're required to do legally. But I would put it to you, that is not now the case. They are to do the best they can for their shareholders, subject to where they are on the overriding requirement of going carbon neutral, wherever that point is in the time they make that decision. And I don't see that there's any movement to achieve that. And if there's no way to achieve it, then it's not going to happen.
Yes.
And quite frankly, folks, I don't. When you're talking about different ways and different sorts of economics, we haven't got the time. We just do not have the time. It's an enormous problem, and we are not pulling together. The world is not pulling together on this one.
Good, thank you. Aarti Kumari.
Thank you, Tom. I want to say that when we are working for the economic growth, we have to take care of ourselves also. If our health is good, in future we can enjoy the growth. So we have to use the natural resources in such a way that it will not cause any damage to the hemispheres and environment.
Yes, good. Thank you, Aarti. No more hands. Oh, are we going back to Ken Carley in Salisbury? The Gaia hypothesis. Ken?
Tom, I think Prasanna was going to say something.
Right, Prasanna, your turn.
The Gaia hypothesis was that the balance of the Earth is fixed. It will progress, but the human beings, if they disturb that balance, they will no longer exist. They will be wiped out, just as many species in the past have been wiped out.
Right.
Because
thank you very much, Ken. I'll ask Prasanna to comment.
Yeah.
Thank you, Tom. Whenever we are doing something for the growth, we should make sure that we are not causing. We should analyze that, is it going to be growth or degrowth? If we are growing it, if we are doing anything for the growth, and it at the end of the day, if it's causing more degrowth than the growth, we should stop that. We should not work for the self, but we should also think about the society and the environment.
Good.
And that's
Thank
my
you very much. Good thing. No more hands up. I see. Is that time for me to close? Thank you all for taking part. A very interesting subject, I think. Very dear to my heart, anyway. And thank you once again. And a recording will be available. I'm about to stop recording now.
Tom, Harry has got his hand up.
Harry? Okay, Harry, away you go.
I would just sort of comment, it's not come up so far, that the extinction of the species that is currently underway is comparable to the end of the epochs, like the end of the Cretaceous period. We are getting rid of the fauna and the fauna at a tremendous rate at the moment, and it's quite frightening.
Yes.
Soon there'll only be the human species available and a few animals that are there to sustain human existence.
Right, we're right into the Anthropocene and the communications revolution. Donal has his hand up.
I just wanted to ask perhaps the lady, I'm sorry, I can't remember your name, from Zimbabwe, a country that I have visited and know a little bit about, and which has had a very traumatic recent history since the 1960s. A country that has had a great dependency on tobacco as its main commercial earnings. And I'm just wondering what has replaced tobacco, or what is replacing tobacco in Zimbabwe? And how does
Zimbabwe, we were talking about that yesterday.
Were you? Yes. Well, this woman she's from Zimbabwe. He's from Dublin. There's a couple from the United States. And this chap, Tom, who is just down here, is chairing it.
Sybil, I'm going to mute you. Thank you. Sorry about that. Barry Zussman.
Thank you for the question about the situation in Zimbabwe. My observation that I have lived for the past just past 20 years, it's the decline of the economy due to mismanagement of the productive practices in the productive land. For example, what is happening? Yes, there has been tobacco, which was a foreign currency earner for quite a long time. But now, because of the mismanagement of the people who are growing and the people who are buying, the amount of tobacco that is being produced is getting less and less each season. And that is economic degrowth. And taking the land, which is supposed to be used for agriculture, it's now being taken by land barons and expanding towns, just building houses. And there is very, very critical shortage of food production, not to talk about tobacco and cotton, which used to bring in foreign currency and boost the GDP of the country. So in terms of what is happening, it's more of degrowth. For example, the land cannot expand, it does not grow, but the population is growing. And you reach a point where you cannot feed the population by what you are producing. For example, now they are importing maize, which is supposed to have been produced by the people. But because of the climate change and not managing the climate change, the food production is getting less and less. That's my contribution.
Thank you very much indeed. That's very useful and very interesting. Barry Zussman had his hand up earlier.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about what I mentioned earlier about how we can actually be agents of change. I sometimes think that that the best thing that could happen is if the astronomers discovered a huge meteorite hurtling towards us that's going to strike in about 20 years. And the only way we can stop it is if every single nuclear warhead owned by every single country on the planet is directed right now at that meteorite. Once we get nuclear warheads out of the way, maybe we can start to solve some of the geopolitical issues. And then we might solve the other problems.
I think there are alternatives to that. Lee Edwards might actually talk about that subject. He's the expert on that. No? Okay.
Not really, no.
Well, I want to thank everybody again. We are still recording, so all of that last part, and that has been very interesting. I'm very pleased that our colleague from Zimbabwe was able to take part. That was most interesting. So goodbye to everyone. The recording will be available. All you need to do is to write to my address, which is tom@worldu3a.org. Goodbye and thank you once again.
Thanks, Tom.
Thanks, Tom. Okay.
Goodbye.
Thanks, Tom.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you.